Dan Gearino is a lifelong comic book geek. By day, he's a mild-mannered reporter and has worked for places like the Columbus Dispatch. And by night, he uncovers the underground culture of comic books. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So how did you get into comic books?
Well, like a lot of people, I've been reading comics about as long as I've been reading. A lot of the comics I read as a young kid, in hindsight, were not very good. But they got me reading, and I kept on going until I started reading better comics, and I never really stopped. I shouldn't say I never stopped. I've stopped for little stretches here and there, but for the most part, I was reading as a kid, and I'm still reading today.
What was your favorite comic book?
By far, my favorite comic book as a kid was The Legion of Superheroes, which is a DC comic. When I was about, say, 9 or 10 years old, The Legion was about as good as it's ever been. And The Legion is a comic or a group of characters that have been around since the 1950s. So that was, and I still have a tremendous amount of nostalgia for The Legion. There's no current Legion comic. So that's was my favorite. There's lots of other things that I guess that I like as an adult, and not kind of purely out of nostalgia. One of my favorite comic artists is Michel Rob-Bagliati, who's a Quebecois artist and cartoonist, and just does amazing work. But yeah, and I could go on for an hour and a half about others I really like.
Your book is one of the first to chronicle the history of the comic book shop. How did you decide which comic book shops you would put in there, which ones you would exclude? How you went about contacting these people about who was first?
So as far as kind of deciding who to include, it was kind of like this rolling focus group in a lot of ways, where there were people I know who'd been to a lot of comic shops, and I would just ask them, okay, I want to understand the business of comics. What stores do I need to see? And after you ask enough people that question, you find that a bunch of stores show up over and over again, and that kind of helped me get this kind of firm foundation. Then when I went out and started actually interviewing people in the shops, I would ask all the shop owners, what other shops should I? There are a lot of shops that are kind of the usual suspects, that are ones that are widely regarded as some of the best and will show up on just about every best of list. There are also ones that I went to and profiled in this book that have never been on a best of list that I've seen. So it ends up being this mix, and there was just kind of, I wish there was a more, I shouldn't say I wish, but there was not some hard and fast criteria for how to decide what to include and what not to.
What makes these shops that kept coming up on the bestseller list the best?
The way that a shop becomes really well regarded is to just really cater to its audience well, and to last for a long time. There are some shops that are relatively new. There are a couple shops in Portland that have not been around very long that are already really well regarded. For example, Portland, Oregon. But a lot of the shops that you often see people talk about as their favorites are ones that have been around for a while and have served multiple generations. So longevity is one thing, and also there are different types of shops that cater to different types of the comics audience. One of the great things about comics is that there's maybe 5 or 6 different comics markets, and some shops can cater to several parts of the market. Some really, really do well of catering to one part. So it's just a matter of, if you're a shop, getting a really dedicated customer and just sticking around for a little while.
So what work still has to be done chronicling the comic book shops and the culture of surrounding comic books?
As far as work that still needs to be done, I think that a real limitation in writing about the business of comics and the business of comics retail is the whole economy of comic shops is not big enough that for there to be third-party economic research on it. So if you want to know some very basic questions like how many comic shops are there, and you want to count that somewhat precisely, or you just want to use some sort of sampling method to try to come up with a number, it doesn't really exist. I mean, what you do have is the number of accounts for a specific distributor or something like that, but that's not necessarily the same as the number of storefronts. Comic sales figures are also not, as far as the comic sales figures to ultimate customers, to actual readers, you can't find reliable data. The data that does exist, it's great that it exists, but it's different from kind of things that I do in my day job as a business writer, where if you're writing about kilowatt hours generated in the electricity system, there are third-party figures on that. If you talk about automotive sales, there are third-party figures on that. So yeah, I would like to have some better and more reliable data.
What does the current state of comic books shops look like right now, and where is it kind of going?
Comic shops have been going through kind of a rough patch the last year or so. In fact, the kind of story arc within the book is in 2015 and 2016, when shops were going through a rough patch and then things got better near the very end. Things have been kind of rough lately, largely because Marvel Comics, the biggest publisher, has been going through a bunch of travails. They're having trouble holding on to their longtime audience. They're having trouble building a new audience. Their publishing arm is having trouble. One thing I learned, though, in working on this book is that this kind of seeming near-death experience of the comics market happens every couple of years. It is a business that historically has had all these kind of up and down cycles, and people who have been in it for a long time kind of get used to it. The thing is, eventually one of these down cycles is going to be too much, and the business will be transformed in a way, and it won't be something that we recognize the way we do now. So you can't just say they're just booms and busts. That's the way of the world in comics. We're going to recover from this, but we're kind of coming out of a bust cycle right now.
So has the internet had any impact on the culture of the comic book shop?
The internet has had a profound impact on the way that new artists and new writers kind of begin to become known. You see a lot of people who are doing web comics and diary comics online that are widely available. They're sharing their artwork through various social media accounts, and they become known and become comics pros because of that. At the same time, though, the online sales of comics, digital comic sales, are there, and they're big enough to be, important to pay attention to. It's not like some other businesses. It's not like the music business where the business is unrecognizable because of online sales. Digital sales are significant but have not been growing like crazy in the last couple of years.
Comic book shops haven't always been around. They were first sold on newsstands. What sort of caused comic book shops to pop up?
So the origin of this thing that is the comic book specialty shop follows directly from the growth of comics fandom in the 1960s. In the 1960s, comics were kind of changing. The reader was getting older. The reader was getting more sophisticated. You saw Marvel Comics come on the scene in the early 60s. DC Comics were getting more sophisticated. Fans wanted to get every single issue. It was shifting a bit from this time when this was an utterly disposable medium. It was like you could pick up an issue of something, and if you missed the next three, and then you picked up another one, didn't really matter. There had been diehard fans for a long time, but the number of them grew substantially in the 1960s. And when you have fans that want to buy every issue, they don't want to miss an issue, and they really care about this stuff. They want a full selection. They want to have the opportunity to check out every comic. The newsstand distribution system was not adequately serving that group. It also, the whole issue of back issue sales. If you wanted to get a comic that was 10 years old, good luck. I mean, unless you went to like a used bookstore where it was often sold in a really disorganized fashion. So the comic book specialty market was serving a committed fan initially. And one of the interesting things about the way the market developed is, as comic shops grew and expanded across the country, you saw the newsstand distribution system shrink. And those are two things that were happening because of separate economic factors, separate changes in their respective businesses. But the comic shop was not designed to be the sole way you get comics, but it kind of became the by far the most common way to get periodical comics, the monthly comics that comic publishers put out.
What do you think is the best way to inundate new readers into comic books? Is that sort of reshaping the new serialized comic books, or making content more accessible?
Public libraries are a great place to find a wide variety of stuff. If you go to a shop like here in Columbus, the Laughing Ogre, if you go in there and you talk to their manager, Gib Bickle, you talk to, or one of their employees, and they are prominent in the book, they will match you up with a comic that you'll really like. It's like, it's uncanny. You just talk about the movies you like, the books you like, and you will, if somebody doesn't read comics, it's just because they haven't read the right comics. There's, like lots of other media, it is a diverse enough, in terms of what's out there, that there's kind of something for everybody. So it's a matter of maybe finding a guide, and that's at a store, or just going to the library and looking across the shelves, because a lot of libraries have really good comic selections now.
Now, for those of us in Columbus, we have the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library. Is that a good resource, or is that more of like a research place?
The Billy Ireland Library is it's a great research resource, but the museum portion of that is just incredible. The events they bring here are just incredible. The Billy Ireland, if I didn't live in Columbus, I would travel long distances to go to some of the events that are there. If you live in Columbus and you're not checking out Billy Ireland at the very least a couple times a year, you're doing it wrong. You need to come. They're open over weekends. That museum, I'm trying to recall the exhibits that are up right now, but it's just incredible.
All right, thank you. And then, is there anything else you would like to talk about?
No.
All right, well, thank you so much for appearing on Craft today.
Thank you very much.